And can you fuck people? Yeah. But that's not all. What is impossible to forgive? Betrayal. We will all go to hell, but in hell we will be better. Absolutely. It's everything that I am. There was an almost unknown mercenary group whose reputation started to grow little by little. People denied that there were actually those Russian soldiers paid to always operate in places of interest to the Russian Federation. Little was said about who they were, and there were doubts about who their leaders might be. In the news reports, they only appeared masked. Their beginnings were significant in Ukraine back in 2014. Helping the pro-Russia separatist militias. The name came from there when a former Russian Special Forces soldier took command. His code name was Wagner because of the musician so beloved by that little mustache crowd from World War II. His real name was Dmitry Putkin, and there were very few images of him. The most prominent photo was the one with tattoos that referred exactly to that mustache crowd. The Wagner group was an active player in Ukraine at that time, with Russia being able to deny any military presence in the area, but it didn't stop there. The group grew, with Yevgeny Prigozhin becoming its main representative. This man, known as the Cook or Putin's chief, was imprisoned during the Soviet era. And then he started a career as a hot dog vendor. Later, he became a restaurant owner and one of the figures serving the Russian president. Whatever Russia needed to do without taking the blame, he would do. What? His militants took part in coups and military training. In Africa, they practically became owners of diamond mines. In Syria, their brutal attacks guaranteed control over gas and oil production centers. In this last country, the group became so famous that it even got a new symbol, perhaps even more emblematic than the white skull on the black background. When a deserter from the Syrian army fell into the hands of the mercenaries, Utkin himself ordered his execution. The man suffered when the soldiers tortured him with hammer blows, breaking his bones. Deaf to the screams, they continued the execution, ending with a tragic dismemberment and the remains set on fire. From then on, the hammer became one of the great symbols of the Wagner group. The mercenaries, also called musicians or the orchestra, were already becoming more famous by then. It spread around the world as a secret that everyone knew, but everyone also denied. Especially the Russians, always proud of the mercenaries that didn't exist. Some recognized the risk. The FBI put Prigozhin on the most wanted list and offered a reward of $250,000 for Prigozhin himself. He sent his full address to the American agency and asked for the money. Apparently, the FBI stiffed the mercenary. When the invasion of Ukraine began in 2022, they came out with news that they would assassinate the Zelenskys. They started a dispute with the mercenary group Redwood, in which Prigozhin threatened his rivals with death. In the end, Redwood suffered so many casualties in the war that it lost any chance of prominence. The Wagner group grew, and Russia lost all shame in saying who it served. The mercenaries advanced on cities using T-90 tanks and army BMPs. Prigozhin flew in an armed forces Su-24 aircraft. And for months, many months, they fought to take cities like Bakhmut and Soledar, making them the only major Russian victory since the invasion, until mid-2023. The acts of the orchestra would leave some impressed enough to admire them, like the hooded men who threw hammers at the embassy of Finland. Others would see them more for their war crimes, and they would recognize them for recruiting prisoners and sending them in waves against Ukrainian forces. To the point of filling cemeteries in Russia, their ruthless reputation as war criminals grew when one of the deserters was put in front of the cameras and felt the weight of the hammer on his head. Prigozhin didn't seem to care about that, and he mocked the impact he caused in the world. The mercenaries' confidence was so great that when they were declared a terrorist group by many countries, they sent their execution hammers as a gift to show what they thought about it. In another video, a former deserter appeared in the same way as the first, and it seemed he had been executed with a hammer. However, days later, the maestro himself appeared alongside him, telling the world that it was all a macabre prank. Trust would reach its peak when the battles of Bakhmut were over. At that moment, all relationships deteriorated. Prigozhin had become a public figure. The Wagner group, with its waves of mercenaries and former prisoners, were now heroes with thanks from Putin himself. But Prigozhin was not satisfied. His video sent messages to the leaders of the Ministry of Defense, Shoigu and Gerasimov. They were recordings filled with rage. Some pointed to the bodies of soldiers who lost their lives due to a lack of ammunition, deliberately made scarce by politicians. The relationship was almost as poisoned as tea laced with polonium. The final straw that broke the camel's back was the order for all volunteers and mercenaries who intended to fight for Russia. They had to submit to the Ministry of Defense by signing a contract. This would take away all the independence of the Wagner group. At that time, stairs and windows had already become dangerous for those dissatisfied with Putin. And for those bold enough to speak freely about it, having a lot of money did not mean safety. Stairs are dangerous, no matter how many bodyguards a person has and no amount of money. Buy the ability to fly out the window without a parachute. My universe is empty. Dmitry Kov, CEO of a medical company. His wife and 2 children were all found stabbed to death. Pavel Antonov was reportedly killed after falling from a 3rd-floor hotel window. Dmitry Pavotka was burned alive after falling asleep with a lit cigarette. The list of misfortunes continued, with up to 40 deaths already in 2023. Since the beginning of the invasion in 2022, the situation between Prigozhin and the Ministry of Defense would become unsustainable, with a series of ironies and extremes that would only make sense in the strangest of scripts. The conspiracy theories would only grow, so get ready for the strangest and most ironic events of this story. The first problems began with the withdrawal of troops from Bakhmut after the victory. The musicians found the route filled with mines. In other words, it was a route the Ukrainians would not use, only Allied forces would. While they were clearing the mines, they were attacked. The attackers' incompetence allowed the mercenaries to recover from the surprise and take control. Capturing Libya. That Russian army officer commented that they did everything on their own because he was drunk and didn't like the orchestra. Everything got even worse in June 2023. The day started tense, with an alleged bombing of the mercenaries' camp by the Russian Ministry of Defense. Soon after, the leader of PMC Wagner released a video accusing the government of lying to the people about the entire war in Ukraine. Prigozhin accused the Russian government of lying to the people. The Federation went to war based on false accusations about the prominence of Nazism in Ukraine. What Putin wanted was more territory for his imperialist agenda. Just sending the soldiers to suffer in disastrous and poorly planned battles, Prigozhin accused the army of incompetence, even with so much power. Instead of quickly dominating Ukraine, it was so incapable that it allowed the country to be armed, and it became one of the most experienced armies in the world. Even with a much smaller population and far fewer years of preparation, then chaos took over completely. Mercenaries left Ukraine, and they took the city of Rostov in southern Russia. From Russia, the official troops laid down their arms in a short time without resistance. The large urban center was under the control of the Wagner group. Then someone shouted, "Call the Chechens!" and they started getting ready for combat. During that time, while some mercenaries were waiting for their sandwich to be ready, a Russian army officer tried to negotiate with Prigozhin, the notorious leader of the revolt. He didn't agree, and apparently, he also didn't want to wait for the sandwich. His forces moved toward Moscow, and the Chechens kept trying to get there, firing non-stop. Videos on TikTok while they were stuck behind the impenetrable barrier of traffic congestion. General Sergei Shrovikin. He appeared with a strange recording asking the Wagner group to pull back. He was one of the few never criticized by Prigozhin, and one of the main people responsible for planning the defenses in Russia, especially in the south of Ukraine, where the Ukrainians went through hell just to get across. Shrovikin was completely ignored on that chaotic day. The army decided to take new measures. Excavators began the process of destroying the roads. Civilian vehicles were used to block the mercenaries in a completely unexpected way. And surprising, the trucks on the road weren't able to stop tanks. The mercenary convoy kept going. K-52 helicopters appeared to stop the advance. Their missiles flew at the column, hitting two vehicles. The truck was too easy a target. Stopped on the bridge, it exploded, killing two people. According to the mercenaries, they were just civilians in the wrong place. There were also some misunderstandings. Some missiles landed in the wrong places, and in some cases, some civilians were affected. Their journeys were interrupted, rather abruptly, because of all the chaos. The convoy continued on its way to Moscow, getting ready to enter Voronezh. The Ka-52S kept up the threat from the sky, and this time, one of the vehicles in the convoy was hit as well. It really burst into flames. While the fire was burning near Voronezh, in Rostov, the sandwich line wasn't moving. The city kept getting more and more Instagrammable with all the tanks spread out. The polite mercenaries caused the initial mess. But at least they had the courtesy to move the armored vehicles for the cleaning service. The Chechens kept firing their shots. They got aggressive on social media to kill time in traffic. Meanwhile, the mercenaries took the opportunity to mine the streets of Rostov. In a tutorial for the Ministry of Defense on how to stop an enemy column in Ukraine, soldiers from the E units, often formed by former prisoners serving the Ministry of Defense, sent the message. They were on Prigozhin's side. Some Chechens seemed to have arrived in Rostov to help with the situation, and the Wagner group people met them and had them do a different routine for TikTok. President Putin issued an official statement. He stated that he was on the side of his ministers who were being threatened by the mercenary leader. For some, all of that seemed weak. The column kept moving. Bothered by a military plane in the sky, they made it land in flames, which cost the lives of 8 crew members and destroyed their equipment. That was in Estrelatin. They started shooting. To show how serious he was about his march for justice, Ka-52 barely escaped, releasing its flares. Others weren't so lucky. Turning into ruins worth millions of dollars on the roads in Ukraine, the popcorn supplies were running out on the shelves. Watching as the plot of that story got hotter and more surprising. The mercenaries. They knew they needed fuel to continue the journey. There were 500 kilometers left to Moscow. They started laying siege to the oil reserves, but the Russian government ensured that no Russian would use that fuel no matter which side the Russian was on. The march continued relentlessly. There was no threat that could stop the 25,000 mercenaries. They claimed to be taking part in the revolt. More and more men were laying down their arms and letting the rebels pass. Moscow was getting closer. Only 200 kilometers left. The Muscovites. They knew that the president had left the capital because the situation was very dangerous. Then the sandwich was ready. The president of Belarus, A vassal state of Russia intervened and spoke with Prigozhin for the honor of Russia and to prevent any Russian blood from being shed. The mercenary leader decided to retreat. Meanwhile, the families of the airplane and helicopter pilots were checking their passports to see if their relatives were really Russian or NATO spies. In Rostov, people were taking advantage of the last moments to take selfies. And they greeted the mercenaries. Prigozhin left the city with an expensive sandwich that cost 3 M8 MPR 1 M81 K52, 1 MI35, and 1 MI28. 1 IL-22, a few million barrels of oil less, but a few dozen highly trained soldiers. A few $1 million, at least, from up in the sky. Sun Tzu and some Russian pilots and soldiers watched and applauded. What the pro-Russian commentators said was a magnificent plan to send Prigozhin to Belarus. The man who had led 50,000 mercenaries into Ukraine. He had taken control of Soledar. He had conquered Bakhmut. He faced Ukrainian special forces. He recorded videos on the worst battlefield of the war. Without being detected, he was apparently having trouble moving his troops and staying hidden into the Russian vassal state, a place where Putin had even sent some nuclear bombs and had used it to cross the borders of Ukraine to reach Kiev. Surely the sacrifice of those pilots and Russian equipment in this fake revolt. It was necessary. Prigozhin received a full pardon for this, in an agreement that sent him to Belarus, where he would leave the Ukrainians. Eternally thoughtful about him having a crazy idea of reaching Kiev in 3 days, since he almost pulled it off. Almost reaching Moscow in less than a day. Thinking about Bakhmut, many minds were shaken. The mercenaries who participated, they received many hugs as they left Rostov. When the police arrived, they were called traitors and harassed for removing the tanks, before many people had even taken their selfies. The poor soldiers who wanted to join the revolt didn't have time. Still in Ukraine, they ended up apologizing for the whole misunderstanding. In the middle of all this, someone forgot to call off the Chechens. The next day, they were on the highways watching for a possible takeover by the Wagner group. They should have called off the Chechens. They wouldn't be needed anymore. Other plans were in the works.
Posters of the Wagner group started to be taken down all over the country. It seemed that the orchestra had really lost its position of prominence. The Wagner group actually ended up in Belarus.
The agreement would be to train the local troops and get paid by Putin while doing so. A large number of them crossed the border and stayed there, apparently carrying out what was promised. In a conversation with the Russian president, the Belarusian Alexander Lukashenko said that the Wagner group intended to march west. Poland got the message loud and clear and proceeded to reinforce its border. The threat never materialized. There were rumors of the mercenaries leaving the camps due to less substantial payments, as well as the transfer of some to the Ministry of Defense, along with some disagreement about who would be responsible for financially maintaining the group, since Russia seemed to refuse. In the meantime, all the orchestra's weaponry had already been confiscated by order of the Kremlin. Prigozhin's mansion was raided, where a large amount of money was found, along with passports and fake identities, which made it impossible to actually discover where he was. The man remained missing for a while. His videos were full of anger. They disappeared. Only a strange photo appeared, suggesting he was probably staying in Belarus. A month later, videos appeared in which Dmitry Utkin spoke to his soldiers, an image that was rarely seen. But in it, he spoke with pride, saying that the orchestra was still playing. Meanwhile, the world kept turning. In Niger, there was a coup d'etat. Politics shifted in places where the Wagner group was essential to extending Russian presence. Maybe that was the reason. Prigozhin and Utkin made their moves. After months, the chef recorded a video showing where he was. But he didn't stay there for long. Rumors started to spread. There were rumors that Russia was starting to undermine all Wagner Group operations in Africa. It was a turbulent period during that time. Two Russian generals passed away. Gennady Zhitko had been a hero of the Russian Federation in Syria, but he failed badly in Ukraine. He died at 58 years old, apparently from a long illness. Gennady Loparev, who was 69 years old, died in prison after experiencing shortness of breath. He was in prison for taking bribes, and strangely they say he died suddenly from an undiagnosed leukemia. He was the man who knew all the secrets of Putin's billion-dollar palace. Besides that, Sergei Shurovik. Missing since the rebellion, he was removed from his post, but still hasn't appeared to receive the news. Meanwhile, Prigozhin and Utkin, they moved freely around Russia, very confident of their agreement with Putin. Two planes linked to the musicians were flying over Russia on August 23, 2023. Exactly 2 months after the rebellion, the Embraer Legacy 600 was flying without problems, according to the recorded data, until it stopped transmitting. Part of the information, according to Telegram channels connected to the Wagner Group, communications were cut off due to electronic interference. Shortly after, a loud noise was heard and witnesses saw the wing coming off. The plane fell from the sky, spinning in flames in a way as shocking as Prigozhin's furious videos. Inside, the entire leadership of the Wagner Group is engulfed by flames and by turbulence as death closed in. Long before the flaming wreckage of the aircraft was filmed hitting the ground, the news spread quickly. In a completely unexpected way, Russia confirmed the presence of Prigozhin and Utkin on the passenger list with unusual speed. That caused suspicion around the whole world. Little by little, news about a second Wagner Group plane leaked, claiming that its leaders could be on it. However, there were those who quickly denied this. Many didn't want to believe it. Prigozhin had become a hero to the Russians. Even so, their bodies were taken to be identified, and his cell phone was found at the crash site at the morgue. His body was reportedly identified by the absence of 2 fingers. Utkin, with his tattoos, was also reportedly confirmed by members of the Wagner Group in Telegram groups. Missile fragment marks were shown on the wings. The Americans said that for sure the missile hadn't been used to bring down the plane. Many smiled, suggesting that it was just an accident then. But then the Americans said that actually it was a bomb inside the plane. To investigate this, the Russians carefully removed it because of the forensic examination. The wing that fell 3 kilometers from where the rest of the wreckage was. Memorials started to spread across the country. Flowers were left by civilians. Mercenaries cried in many places. The hammers were placed to remember what the Wagner Group already represented. But it wasn't all mourning. Cemeteries scattered across Russia started to be vandalized, with some memorials simply disappearing, so that those called war heroes would soon be forgotten. There were those who denied it and said that the cemeteries were just being reconfigured for another kind of tribute. There was still hope that Prigozhin could be alive. In 2019, he was considered dead because of a plane crash. Coming from a player like him, you couldn't call anyone who believed that crazy. But until then, the leadership of the Wagner Group was finished. And all that was said for sure about his future was that there was a protocol prepared for this. Something mysterious. No one knew how extensive it was or how relevant it would be. The Ministry of Defense would continue its work to eliminate the influence of the Wagner Group in Africa, removing equipment and forcing their withdrawal from several bases. Also, many mercenaries would be encouraged to swear allegiance to the Ministry of Defense. Putin would put another decree into effect, reaffirming the need for every army volunteer to sign a contract with the Russian government. The ironies of this story are many and fitting for Prigozhin, a man who challenged the whole country and did so much for that same country to the point that Russia's roots grew deeper in places they had never been before. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, Utkin and his companion were responsible for safeguarding the Russian army from the worst moments of the war in Ukraine in 2022. And in 2023, with plans that still maintained strong momentum in a difficult war. The actions of the Wagner Group. They cannot be underestimated in Syria, in Libya, and so many countries in Africa. It was Putin extending his power without getting his hands dirty. Even in the end, the Wagner Group was extremely useful to the Russian president. The tragic plane crash showed the world that not even a man with an army would succeed in overthrowing Vladimir Putin. Yes, many would speculate that there would be cracks in the marble column of power in Russia. But until August 2023, plane and drone crashes did not shake the man who held the real power in the country.
I'll repeat, any internal unrest is a deadly threat to our statehood, to us. As a nation, this is a blow to Russia, to our people, and our actions to protect the homeland from such a threat. They will be tough. Everyone who has consciously chosen the path of betrayal, those who prepared an armed rebellion, who chose the path of blackmail and terrorist methods, they will face inevitable punishment. Death is not the end. It's the start of something different.
We all fall into the fire, but in the fire, we will get better, for sure.